then this morning, and welcome everyone. My name is Ryan Erb. I am the Executive Director here at the United Way, and so grateful for your time today. And building on our tradition that we began with the pandemic to gather our not-for-profit organizations and to provide support where we can and to share information and move forward as best we can as a group, a collective across the region to help as many people as we can. So just reminding that because there's usually quite a few people on these calls, we don't do introductions around the table. It would take too long. Not that we aren't appreciative of you and your presence here, but what we'd like you to do instead is to announce yourself in the chat box, and please state your name and also state what organization you're representing and any maybe update that you might have to share with the group that you want to type in there to help them understand something that might be happening at your organization. And you're welcome, of course, to extend an invitation to future calls. We're doing these every couple of months, and you can provide information to other people and help to guide who might join us. So Lauren Thompson is our administrative associate who is helping us today. And if you want to pass along contact information or reach out to her in any way to enjoy people, or to pass along information to people that would be here. You probably saw this already, that the meeting is being recorded so that we can post it to our website and share it with people who are unable to attend live and in person. So just so you are aware. So welcome. We're grateful that you're here. And want to introduce to you next, Megan Partridge from the United Way staff team. Megan.
Good morning, everyone. So I just wanted to provide a few updates before we get started with the learning today. So our new initiatives funding process, the applications are open currently for expressions of interest. Those will remain open until next Friday, November 5th at midnight. So United Way recognizes and actually encourages new approaches and innovations to community services. So this stream is really meant to respond to emerging needs, test or evaluate new models of service, support collaborative partnerships, or assist with piloting a new project. These grants are for up to $20,000. The funding, if approved, would start April 1st, 2022 and would be for 1 year. There's 2 stages to the application process. So the first stage, which is the expression of interest, is open currently, and that is really an eligibility checklist. So it's really quick to submit that. The only other thing that's asked for on there is a very brief description of what people are thinking of applying for. If all the eligibility criteria and the proposed program meet the eligibility, then you would move on to the full application. Those full applications, there's another few weeks to work on that, so they close November 26th. As are all of our grants, these are reviewed by our volunteer committee and approved by our board. So funding decisions would come mid-March to the organizations that applied. All the information and more details are up on our website, as well as how to get in and create a profile or apply for funding. If anyone has any questions about eligibility or about ideas, I always say give me a call at the office or send me an email. I'll put my contact information in the chat box as well. And I'm happy to provide any information on that. Does anyone have any questions about that right now? Okay, I'll move ahead. Let me know if you have any questions. And just providing a couple updates on behalf of another on our team. So 211, the team continues to do great work to update the nearly 1,700 records that are in 211 for Huron and Perth. The staff do check in with organizations once a year. It was more actually during the pandemic to make sure information is correct, because as people are calling in for community services, we want to make sure that they're getting the appropriate information about your services. So please continue to update your records if there are any changes throughout the year. And remember that this is a resource to share with your clients or with friends, neighbors, anyone to be able to access community services, because that's that free live support that we have in our community. The last update I have is an exciting event that's coming up just next week. November 5th is the Women United event. We encourage people to attend or share with their family and friends. There's in-person events in Stratford and Listowel and virtual options for anyone else. Full details are on the website, as well as how to access tickets. I know I went to the event last year and it was just phenomenal. So I would definitely recommend it for your Friday night. And I'll put the poster and some more details in the chat box as well. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Megan. Appreciate all those updates. We are really pleased to have with us Mojdeh Cox. She is someone who's becoming a good friend of mine, I hope. We're going to go have a get together next week, actually. We're just starting to get to know each other in her relatively new role, leading our friends at Pillar in London. But I'm proud that she's here today and able to share with you. I'm going to read a bit of an introduction about her. Mojdeh believes in the power of collective compassion, creativity, and action to work towards solutions to complex social issues. Mojdeh has been instrumental in raising the profiles of municipal, provincial, and federal political and advocacy campaigns and building community along the way. At the time when government, business, and not-for-profit organizations look to contribute to the dismantling of system of barriers, Mojdeh brings forward experience and expertise in labor relations, human rights, and equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. For over a decade, Mojdeh has coached organizational and community leaders, businesses, and not-for-profit organizations on reimagining their work through a heightened equity lens rooted in social justice. So, Mojdeh, welcome. We're so grateful that you're here today to speak with us.
Thank you. Thank you for, it's a reminder to trim up that bio. It's unnecessarily long. So I have to stop directing people to the site and actually trim it up for every occasion. I appreciate the warm welcome. And certainly I imagine us being BFFs by the end of this COVID struggle. Ryan, as my kids would say. I have a presentation for you all today. I hope to move through this in a good way. Really, I want to focus on what I've been, in a way, for lack of better terms, crusading across the country to talk about, and it's the concept of radical accountability. The invitation from United Way here on Perth wanted, really asked for us to dive into the resilience of the sector, and I think that that's so important to speak about. And I feel like when we are trying to imagine the future state, we have to look at how we conduct ourselves and what accountability can contribute to our future state. So a little about what I will be doing here. I may be the creative type. I'm really striving to be so, but I always have to have an agenda, and here it is. I'd like to start by giving you an intro to Pillar for those who may not have, and maybe I'll ask a show of hands if you'd like me to get into too deeply into what we're about, but I'll certainly give a snapshot, as well as a snapshot of the sector now as we look at a year into COVID in terms of our official lockdowns. We'll also touch on what equity, diversity, and inclusion trends are, and the reason is that we across the country, as I'm hearing people, my peers, thought leaders across the country, as well as advocates, saying that we are not going to have an equitable recovery without focusing in on equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. There's no longer a question about this. And so I'd like to discuss what is it that folks can do if you want to tap into these trends and go with the flow of the sector, and perhaps be against the current in some circumstances. What are the things that you can do? And the last 3 points here are going to, the latter part of the presentation will give you the meat on the bones, so to speak. I already changed my mind. This is what happens with creatives. I'm just gonna go right in and do a bit of an overview for what Pillar is. But before I do that, I just realized I made the same whoopsie as the first time, and I didn't click off that teensy little button that says share audio. So, oh, share sound. I did actually. So I surprise myself every day. Sorry for the delay here. We'll get back to presenting as if that didn't happen. About Pillar, here we are. We believe that connected networks, similar to the way that you're bringing folks together in this platform and profile, we believe that bringing people together in a connected way sparks collaboration and the willingness to not just lean on one another, but also leverage our skill sets, tools, resources to move the agenda of good along. And frankly, that's how we believe that inclusive and vibrant communities of belonging happen. And so if we were to really ask, well, who are we? We work with hundreds of individuals and organizations making change. This includes anywhere from businesses to impact investors and our volunteers. Most importantly, we identify ourselves as folks working together through what we call is our network approach. And I pointed both Ryan and Joelle to this network approach concept some time ago. And essentially that is our guiding principles. And I think in any action plan, strategic plan, plan of action, however you want to word it, you really need guiding principles. And so this is what we have as ours. We, once again, as a network, we believe in collaboration. We believe in leadership and governance and rules of order. And good governance, frankly, for transparency and building trust. We believe in equity and inclusion, and we actually articulate our day-to-day actions through storytelling and impact. The way that we execute our guiding principles and how we execute our strategic plan, how we root ourselves in equity and inclusion is in fact through this strategic plan. This plan charts a bold path for our organization and network. You know, the challenges of helping support a sustainable and equitable recovery, creating transformational change and shifting systems of oppression are complex, and it can't be done alone. So our strategic plan brings our network along with us. We're rooted in speaking about equity in action, change in action, and recovery in action, all of which is really through a heightened and lens of anti-oppression. We just launched this in April of 2021, right when yours truly also entered the nonprofit network with Pillar as well. And so, you know, you and I both are getting to know this strategic plan and learning how to navigate it together. You know, a little bit more about, you can't come to these spaces without a little bit of humble brag. Innovation Works is where our collaboration, it's our physical manifestation of our guiding principles, our mission, vision, and values. Innovation Works is a shared space, and I'm going to let this video tell you all about itself, if that's okay with y'all.
Innovation Works is more than a place to work. Innovation Works is a place I look forward to walking in the door every single day.
I feel like I'm just in this hub of creative people, empowering each other and motivating each other to do big and cool things.
It's the connections, it's the energy, it's the vibrancy.
It is probably one of the warmest, most inviting and just fun spaces, and the people.
Oh dear. Sorry, that's my slippery fingers. I'm not gonna make you go through all of that.
It's the
just fun spaces, and the people are exactly that. They're warm, they're inviting, they're fun, and they're just great to be around.
There's always so much happening.
I'm involved in all kinds of collaborations that I wouldn't have been if I wasn't located here.
I'm used to having to go to places, to go to events, to network. Here I just have to show up and sit in my desk and the network shows up.
I've met soulpreneurs, I've met people who are for-profit companies, and it's just the collision, and I love that part.
It gives me the freedom to be my own boss. It lets me work where I want to work.
I use the shared working space, and it's great to be part of the community, to be in a space that's quiet enough but active enough that I can get my work done.
It's awesome, in my opinion.
There's this constant draw here to thrive, to connect, and to feel good about what you do on a regular basis.
A snapshot of who we are. You know, Innovation Works is not just a meeting space. We have lovely pooches on the 4th floor where dogs are allowed. So it is, in fact, a little bit of work, a little bit part work, part therapy, frankly. The other important arm of our business that I want to tell you about, and in fact, United Way can speak to this, is Impact Consulting, a social enterprise of Pillar Nonprofit Network. And one of the ways, you know, a lot of folks come to us and ask us questions about either A, how we've developed this thing or approach, or ask us quite point blank, what are the next steps that we can take to drive us closer to equity and inclusion within our organization and who we deal with. It's not the only thing that we do. We speak about social finance, social innovation. We have custom workshops, and it's actually built on our well-known board governance training. So if you ever do need any of these services, please do reach out to us, and I promise you that is the end of the humble brag. Now let's take a look at what the sector is looking like today. You know, I have to really credit and thank and be grateful for the Ontario Nonprofit Network. They've really provided us with some tools, resources, insights to understand the sector and what are the things that we need to be focused on. You know, when I was asked to come here to speak about resilience, I thought about these stats immediately, because the ONN just released a sector survey that our area, in fact, did really well in responding to. And here are some of the findings. We know that there are 58,000 nonprofits and charities in Ontario. So that's a pretty tremendous number as we go through some of these other stats. Based on the ONN survey 1 year out of the COVID lockdown, we understand that those who participated, 24% laid off colleagues because of the impact of COVID. 69% didn't receive government COVID supports, monetary supports. And half of the nonprofits who responded reported loss of revenue. Now, when we're talking about resilience, despite all of that, the sector still makes up for 5.2 million volunteers in Ontario. Can you just wrap your minds around what it is that we're doing here? 5.2 million volunteers. And in fact, despite the financial disparities, 2.6% of Ontario's GDP, amounting to $50 billion in impact, is what the sector is responsible for. So if we want to talk about resilience, we know that A, we are very much so needed, though we are vulnerable in this moment. We are still contributing greatly to not only our economic state in the province, but our social and political state, rather, even in terms of advocacy and what we are able to speak about and what agenda we're pushing forward. So it's not all doom and gloom, though we have had some real deep impact in the sector because of COVID. I think it's important to also explore what I call Jedi Trends. And I'll go into, I see some smiles there, some appreciation for that acronym. And let's break it down. We first started talking about this work by talking about equality. And we soon learned that it doesn't matter if we give everyone the same resources, because that's equality, right? Giving people the same thing to help them move forward. Because there are systemic barriers that fundamentally advantage some over others. And this has been a historical legacy that we've all inherited, regardless of our race, creed, status in this country. we've all inherited this legacy of systemic oppression. And so despite us all, if I need a piece of paper to get through my day, and Ryan needs a notebook, we can't give the same resource and expect the same outcome. Some may need more, some may need less, some may need a completely different approach. And that's what we need to keep our focus on. So we moved away from that. And now, you know, as you can tell from my long-winded bio, you know, I've been in this game of speaking about anti-oppression before it was the cool thing, before people were paying to learn about it, before people were investing to move the agenda along within their own organizations. And this isn't a, you know, let's get hunkered down deep in our shame, because it has brought us at this point that we've become heightened and have a heightened awareness of these issues. It's forever an evolution. So I come from a time where I was like, please let me deliver this to you for free. And now we're at a time where there's consultants doing this work in abundance. So we're in a good place. So that evolution is necessary. Jedi, despite what it might sound like it means justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. These are the 4 elements that we need to think about when we're looking at anti-oppression or even moving systems along, particularly when we're talking about recovery in an equitable way. So there's been some shifts in what we've been learning, what we were focusing on, and how we've been acting. And I'll start at the learning side of things. These days, we're finding it absolutely important to dive deep into historical context and understanding the history of this country, as well as the sector, as well as our organization, of our communities, understanding what are the deep-seated legacies that we've in fact inherited. So there's been that focus of not just looking at the current state or future state, we are rooting ourselves in understanding historical context. And this is integral to Indigenous relations, frankly. We're focusing on belonging, and Jedi doesn't include belonging. It'd be Jedib and it wouldn't be as exciting. So I can't, you know, crusade across the province talking about Jedib in the same way. All that to say, belonging is central to this work, because we can do all that we have in our power to do. If folks don't feel like they belong, their outcomes are ultimately impacted in an equitable way. We know this. Stats and research have pointed to this for years. And now, when it wasn't cool and I was begging people to let me deliver this to you for free, we were talking a lot about privilege. But now we're centering the focus on harm and what the oppression is, because that helps us more deeply understand the state of play. In terms of our focus, yes, we're talking about individuals and changing hearts and minds. That's a part of it, and we'll get to that momentarily. But we're really looking at things from a systems level now. We are understanding that emotional intelligence is a part of this factor, and it also won't fit in that acronym, so we'll just fold it in. And we know that we have to dismantle these legacies that we are not necessarily responsible for creating, but we certainly have taken part in. And that's where the systems change piece will come into play. And these are the uncomfortable pressure points that we'll have to live through. I am not a white person, so I don't know how that feels, but I can only imagine that it doesn't feel good to have this legacy land on everyday people today who care about the state of the world. So how do we tap into, and this is why the emotional intelligence piece is so important. This is why our focus is on systems. You see how this all just sort of folds into one another. Now, in terms of action and how we're choosing to act these days, you know, we talked about allyship to the point where I don't even like saying the word too much these days, to be frank. It's not that it's not important. There's a shift, and we're going to talk about what that shift is from allyship to accomplice. And when they do come up with a term that has less of a negative connotation to it, I will adapt it regardless of what it sounds like or how cool it will sound when I crusade. But an accomplice is in fact a different way of supporting the good fight, rather, or systems change approach to anti-oppression and where we are as a sector today. Again, we talked about where we're not just talking about equality, we're talking about justice now. We are in a place and time where thousands of bodies of children dead were found in unmarked graves in masses. There is no surprise that we have to talk about justice. There is no more, time's up. There's no more time left for us to theorize about anything else other than justice. And just like you're doing today, we're not looking at tokenistic representation. We're talking about placemaking and creating space for diverse voices and diverse folks and perspectives and lenses. And I see United Way being leaders, in fact, across the country through your federated networks in doing that. So I know that that's something that you can build on and strengthen in a remarkable way. Now, before I get into anything else, I'm gonna get real emotional. Get your tissues out. I'm just kidding. It's not gonna be as sad. I know Brené Brown tends to bring us into that emotional state. And for those maybe kind of doing the eye roll without me really noticing, trust me, there's not a lot of folks talking about trust these days. And Brené Brown is one person. If you find someone else, send them my way. Nothing against Brené Brown. I just know that we're tired of hearing the same voices over and over again. I'm never tired of her. Frankly, I'll just be honest with you. I want to talk about trust. And I want to talk about trust in the most relatable way possible. And this clip, I hope, will bring us to where we need to be. And I'll preface this by saying, a decade and a half I've been doing consulting work before arriving at Pillar to talk about this more, but in a time and place where we have an appetite for it. And I have to say, over and over again, the number one question that I'm asked repetitively to this day is, what can we do next? It's the action piece. Am I wrong? Am I right? Where's the lie? Throw up an emoji if you know, or a response, whatever you call them in Zoom. What are they calling them now? Not emojis. Reactions. Yes. Sorry, my full screen's not up, so I had to take a wild guess. Give me a reaction if you believe me when I tell you that fundamentally at the root of much of what we need to do is building on our understanding of trust, and emotional intelligence is a part of this journey. And if we want to act, we have to really root ourselves in our intention and ensure that others are brought along the way with us. So here is a snapshot of one lens and perspective of trust, and we'll unpack it after the clip, I promise you that.
One day, my daughter, Ellen, came home from school. She was in 3rd grade, and the minute we closed the front door, she literally just started sobbing and slid down the door until she was just kind of a heap of crying on the floor. And of course, it scared me, and I said, "Oh my, what's wrong, Ellen? What happened? What happened?" And she pulled herself together enough to say, something really hard happened to me today at school, and I shared it with a couple of my friends during recess. And by the time we got back into the classroom, everyone in my class knew what had happened. And they were laughing and pointing at me and calling me names. And it was so bad, and the kids were being so disruptive, that her teacher even had to take marbles out of this marble jar. And the marble jar in the classroom is a jar where if the kids are making great choices together, the teacher adds marbles. If they're making not great choices, the teacher takes out marbles. And if the jar gets filled up, there's a celebration for the class. And so she said, it was one of the worst moments of my life. They were laughing and pointing, and Miss Balkin, my teacher, kept saying, "I'm gonna take marbles out," and she didn't know what was happening. And she looked at me, and she, just with this face that is just seared into my mind, and said, "I will never trust anyone again." And my first reaction, to be really honest with you, was damn straight. You don't tell anybody anything but your mama. Yeah, right? That's it. I mean, that was my like, you just tell me, and when you grow up and you go off to school, mama will go too, I'll get a little apartment. And the other thing I was thinking, to be quite honest with you, is I will find out who those kids were. And while I'm not going to beat up a 9-year-old, I know their mamas. That's the place you go to. And I'm like, how am I going to explain trust to this 3rd grader in front of me? So I took a deep breath and I said, Ellen, trust is like a marble jar. She said, what do you mean? And I said, you share those hard stories and those hard things that are happening to you with friends who over time you filled up their marble jar. They've done thing after thing after thing where you're like, I know I can share this with this person. Does that make sense? And that's what Ellen said. Yes, that makes sense. And I said, do you have any marble jar friends? And she said, oh yeah, I totally. Hannah and Lorna are marble jar friends. And I said, and then this is where things got interesting. And I said, tell me what you mean. How do they earn marbles for you? And she's like, well, Lorna, if there's not a seat for me at the lunch cafeteria, she'll scoot over and give me half a Heine seat. And I'm like, she will? She's like, yeah, she'll just sit that like that, and so I can sit with her. And I said, that's a big deal. This is not what I was expecting to hear. And I said, then she said, and you know Hannah on Sunday at my soccer game? And I was waiting for this story where she said, I got hit by a ball, and I was laying on the field, and Hannah picked me up and ran me to first aid. And I was like, yeah? And she said, Hannah looked over and she saw Oma and Opa, my parents, her grandparents, and she said, look, your Oma and Opa are here. And I was like, boy, she got a marble for that? And she goes, well, you know, not all my friends have 8 grandparents, because my parents are divorced and remarried. My husband's parents are divorced and remarried. And she said, and it was so nice to me that she remembered their names. And I was like, And she said, do you have marble jar friends? And I said, yeah, I do have a couple of marble jar friends. And she said, well, what kind of things do they do to get marbles? And this feeling came over me, and I thought, the first thing I could think of, because we were talking about the soccer game, was that same game, my good friend Eileen walked up to my parents and said, Deanne, David, good to see you. And I remember what that felt like for me. And I was like, certainly, trust cannot be built by these small, insignificant moments in our lives. It's got to be a grander gesture than that. So, as a researcher, I start looking into the data. I gather up the doctoral students who've worked with me. We start looking, and it is crystal clear. Trust is built in very small moments. And when we started looking at examples of when people talked about trust in the research, they said things like, yeah, I really trust my boss. She even asked me how my mom's chemotherapy was going. I trust my neighbor, because if something's going on with my kid, it doesn't matter what she's doing, she'll come over and help me figure it out. You know, one of the #1 things emerged around trust in small things? People who attend funerals. This is someone who showed up at my sister's funeral. Another huge marble jar moment for people, I trust him because he'll ask for help when he needs it. How many of you are better at giving help than asking for help? Right? So asking for help is one of those moments. So one of the ways I work as a grounded theory researcher is I look at the data first, then I go in and see what other researchers are talking about and saying, because we believe the best theories are not built on other existing theories, but on our own lived experiences. So after I had looked at this, I said, let me see what the research says. And I went to John Gottman, who's been studying relationship for 30 years. He has an amazing work on trust and betrayal. And the first thing I read, trust is built in the smallest of moments.
I know that was abrupt. You want to hear the rest, don't you? It's take note, Super Soul Sessions, Brené Brown. It's 23 minutes long. We don't have that kind of time. So I just wanted to give you a snapshot of what this research is saying to us about building trust. Why is this important to us as a sector? Well, if we plan to have an equitable recovery and bring people along with us, how do we do it any other way and to build trust amongst the folks whom we have around us. That was a rhetorical question. You don't need to answer that, but we'll get back to that in just a moment. So, let's unpack this a little bit. So later on into the clip, Brené Brown goes into the definition of trust by Charles Feltman, who did this immense research on trust. And it is clearly defined as trust is choosing to make something important to you vulnerable to the actions of someone else. Now, on the flip side of that, right? In gaining trust, so this is if you are trusting someone. If you trust someone, you make something vulnerable to you, important to you rather, vulnerable to the actions of someone else. Like telling a really private or important piece of information about yourself to someone. One of the lines that my children say back to me as though they're on like autopilot is, "That's not my story to tell." They hear me say that so often that when I bring them in, I have twins who are 7, I bring them in and I say, "Okay, who did this?" And the other would say to me, "That's not my story to tell." So sometimes it backfires. But trust, when you are trusting someone, you're making something important to you vulnerable to the actions of someone else. But when you are trying to be trusted, you're trying to gain trust and turn your thoughts and ideas into action. You can't do that with nobody beside you, nobody behind you, nobody in front of you. And in order to have that circle of support and amplify the impact, you need to build trust. And it's not in some grand gesture. You don't need to uproot the system completely day 2 of talking about this. Tomorrow, you don't need to have systemic change 100% happen in order to gain the trust of someone. You heard that. Half a hiney, took half a seat for this little girl, right? Just to share space. You think about showing up and saying someone's name that's important to the person that you're trying to build trust with. These are small gestures, folks. And if you can, we'll unpack some ideas around how as a nonprofit or charitable body, a sector entity, we can create these marble jar moments. But we have to root ourselves in the understanding that it doesn't require a grand gesture. We have to ask ourselves, let's reflect. What do you need personally to build trust? What do you need professionally? And then think about, what does your community or your communities need to build collective trust? This is how we're going to create change, folks, because we can talk all the sweet talk. This is why I don't perfect my speaking. I'm pretty candid and loose about my exchanges, because at the end of the day, it's about building trust. And I know that. It's not about how articulate we are, how much knowledge we particularly hold. It's about who's actually going to listen and walk with you. So let's reflect on these 3 areas. And allyship in this sector is a really important thing to speak about when we're talking about resilience and equitable recovery and how we take those steps. I don't have the answers for the formula in your specific region to what is the exact makeup of an equitable recovery, but what I can tell you is that it requires us to think about things a little differently. So when we're building trust, fundamentally we look at allyship as a leadership trait, but also just a foundational human trait of empathy, right? You don't need to be a leader to be an ally. You just need to be a human being who has empathy to be one. And so what is allyship? And is it enough? I may lose some friends, but I'm okay with that, because it's about trust and truth telling. What is needed? So if we're looking at allyship as the term, we've been told for over, I don't know how long, back in the day when I was begging people to come in for free workshops just so they can get a glimpse of this work and try to immerse it in their everyday practical and professional lives and personal lives. We were saying that allyship is uniting oneself with another to work towards a common goal. There's a lot fancier definitions of it. More importantly, an ally will mostly engage in activism by standing with an individual or a group in a marginalized community, one seeking justice, seeking equity. I don't think that's enough. I don't think that's enough anymore. An accomplice, though, is what we can strive to be, but the good kind. As I said, if somebody hears a better term for this, call me. I'll put my talk text right in the chat, because if I hear a random word, I know what it's all about, because I'm searching. But so far, I've only been able to land on accomplice. An accomplice will focus more on dismantling the structures that oppress that individual or group, and is taking direction. So allyship is not just the action of standing with. An accomplice, what's really important here is the trust is built because someone is giving you direction. They're allowing you to hold what's important to them, vulnerable to your actions, no? And secondly, why it's important to be an accomplice in terms of taking action is that an accomplice will actually take on this plight as though they are experiencing the harm themselves. Now, that's not stating that you are. Don't go out there saying, I know how you feel, because you may not. But what we're saying is that allyship is no longer just this idea of understanding the plight. It's time's up for just understanding now. We're in the moment of action. And so how do you move from allyship to striving to be an accomplice? And I think that is rooted in accountability. Can there be trust without accountability? Can someone trust you if they don't feel that you can actually bear consequence to taking part in things that don't build trust, like not having good intention, that sort of thing? And I'm not accusing anyone of that, but what I'm saying is that until trust is built, that's always an option. That's always floating around. So if we're looking at the 7 elements of trust, and if you watch that 23-minute clip with Brené Brown at some point in your lives, you will hear about the 11 elements of trust, or sorry, not 11. Ooh, that's a lot of elements. 7 elements of trust. Reliability and accountability are integral to that. And trust is one of those things that you need to build on your emotional intelligence, regulating your emotions and knowing how to act on them, and understanding your impact on others. Reliability is doing what you say you're going to do and doing it time and time again. Now, a caveat to this is with impact. So if you keep moving the salt and pepper shaker in the dinner table from the center to the left, and it ain't got no impact, my friends, stop wasting your time. Let's try something new. But reliability is, if you articulate and state your intent, you're actually doing that, you're doing it time and time again. And accountability, to me, this is not the definition that Brené Brown gives. To me, it is the act of being responsible for something and being able to justify your rationale, or the how and the why of your words and actions. And we need radical accountability. That's just plain old accountability, folks. To be to be accountable radically means something altogether different. And so if we're talking about what radical accountability is, I was just speaking with another entity in London, Ontario, the it was the release of the Vital Signs report from the London Community Foundation, great friends of Pillar nonprofit network. And I had to tell this story because they introduced me as some words now that hasn't quite landed yet. It was like something like gracious and persistent or tenacious is how I was described, you know, the stories people tell about you. So I didn't know this. I was never described as that before. And I'll tell you why I'm telling you this. I shared with those folks that, you know, back in the day, I was called a radical. You know, in my early stages, I was an activist from an early, I hope I don't lose any friends over this one either, because it's a silly detail to lose friends over. But in my early, you know, years, I certainly, my activism, it was bold, and I was often called a radical. But I had this prof who introduced me to many concepts that I still carry with me as truth today. Define the word radical as getting to the root, affecting the fundamental nature of something. I thought, well, if that's what radical is, then color me radical. I'm okay with that. So that's why I pegged this idea of accountability to be one that requires to be radical, getting to the root and changing, altering, affecting the fundamental nature of something. And if you combine that with the act of being responsible for something and being able to justify your rationale and the why and the how of your own actions, that really brings us full circle. Now, there's an anatomy to this too. It's something I guess snuck from Brene Brown, the terminology of having an anatomy of something, to dissect something. There are 4 pieces to radical accountability, and I'm going to end on this after I pose a question to you all. Or I'm going to say this, ask you a question, and then end is what I meant to say. 4 elements to radical accountability, my friends. Brutal honesty. Okay, time's up. Truth-telling is at the focus and center of this. Setting intention so that you can be reliable. Remember, reliability is the act of saying and doing what you say you're going to do and doing it consistently and doing that thing consistently. Self-reflection. And then changed behavior. So brutal honesty, setting intention, self-reflection, and change behavior. Notice how none of that has to do with anybody else but your own self, right? And that's what I think is really important to point out about the difference between what our initial and foundational understanding of accountability is. And I'm making some huge assumptions, so you know, give me a thumbs down if you thought that accountability meant that you had to hold yourself, because the narrative that I hear, whether we think this or not, what we articulate time and time again is accountability is this. How do you hold someone else, government, businesses, you know, people, fill in the blank, politicians, like just holding someone else accountable. And, you know, fundamentally, I turn back around and say, this is why we can't have nice things. Because we're doing this. This is why we're not making any real, tangible progress. Systems change is really important. My biggest fear about the idea of systems change is that we think of it as this inanimate object that's running on its own. But frankly, people, you and I, affect systems. We actually run systems, we uphold them, we implement processes within systems. We are the gears. We actually make systems move along. People, individuals are at the root of systems. They don't just operate on their own. So that's why the self is so important here. Forget about holding politicians. Not to say don't do this advocacy work or all of that. That's a whole different game. What we're talking about is in the everyday work of the sector. How is it that we can root ourselves in radical accountability, but actually looking at ourselves as what can affect change? So I have a question for you all, and my closing is just simply thank you. So don't worry, we have time to unpack this, but I'm really curious in the concept of marble jar moments, those little things. Remember, half a hiney, or saying Oma and Opa's name. We're not talking about grand gestures. What are some ways that within your community you can create and execute marble jar moments so that you can build trust? That's a question. If you make eye contact with me, I'll pick on you and make you give me an answer on the spot. But I really want to see if you have any ideas about this. You know, how can we create those marble jar moments? Can it be about listening and remembering the details of, let's say, First Nations folks in and around your area? Understanding the history of that land. Do you know if the land that you're on is treated? Is it unceded? That's a marble jar moment. You know what's one for me? And it's a silly one, it's a personal one, but it is one that's on the community level as well. It's when people take pause and say, how do I say your first name? You see how that's such a small act? It's had such a deep, profound impact on me though. Because I was the kid in class that when the teacher did one of these, I raised my hand and said, I'm here, Mojdeh. That's how you say my name. My whole life, I had to say my own name. And rarely was it ever repeated. I hardly ever heard my own name repeated outside of my household. And so now, at this supple age of 40-something, I am in this great place of privilege where people are leaning in and saying, how do I say your name? That's a marble jar moment. Do we do that with the traditional name of the territories we're on? Can we do that? Can we start to call things what they are so that the communities that are impacted by things that are deeply problematic now more than ever, as they have been for a long time, things like people experiencing homelessness and their plight in these times, food insecurity, economic disparity. Can we just accept their narrative? Can that be a marble jar moment? So I'll leave you with that. I won't dock any points for y'all not playing along with me when I call the question, but you know, I understand that it's not easy to have some of this information land, but the most empowering thing about radical accountability is this. Friends, it's hard work. This is, don't get it twisted. This is a call to action. I believe that you folks can tap into this call to action. I've had few interactions with Joelle and Ryan already, and I know where their hearts and minds are. It's hard work, but guess what? When we partake in this idea of radical accountability, we hold all that we need to create change. Is that not, like, I got goosebumps. I say this so many times in a week and I still don't get tired of it. We actually have the power to create the change we wish to see if we hold ourselves radically accountable. All that we need is within us. It's not about tools and resources, not where we need to begin. So when people ask me today, what is it that I can do? Two things I respond and say: you have the power to create the change you want in the communities that you serve, in the agenda that you want to push forward. Number one, focus on building trust. Number two, be radically accountable. Create those marble jar moments and be radically accountable. It starts with you. You can't hold anyone else accountable until you are 100% perfect. And last time I checked, y'all, there's not a whole lot of perfection out there. So it is an ongoing journey for us. So join me. I know this was an invitation to talk about resilience, and Ryan and Joelle and Lisa and Lauren and Co. You know, I have to say, I turned this into a call to action. Join me, join us. Let's unite. Let's unite and together alone in our self-reflection and keeping ourselves radically accountable to what the sector needs today for an equitable recovery. Join me. I invite you. Thank you all. And look at that, 1 minute before time. No time for questions, because, you know, I asked y'all a question and it was silent. So I thought I'm gonna turn this into a call to action now. I'm deeply grateful. Contact us if you need any support. We have what it takes to do what we need to do in this moment. Let's not let this slip. Let's take advantage of that opportunity. Thank you. I appreciate you. On to you, team.
Ryan, did you want to jump in before you head out?
Well, just simply to say thank you. I do have another meeting I have to jump to, but really appreciated your words, your expression, your heart, who you are, and I want to learn and walk with you. So this is a fantastic opportunity for all of us to begin to do that. And looking forward to more conversations and deepening relationships so that we can continue to learn. So have a good day, everyone. I have to jump, and Joelle's going to help wrap things up. So take care.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, echoing Ryan's comments for sure. I think the lack of sort of comments, I think, have a lot to do with the complexities in which we're facing in the not-for-profit sector. And I think you set the stage really well, and really appreciate that action, that call to action, that we have a lot of power and we can lead from our seats. And I think this also gives us that permission to be actionable in our seats, and where we can make an impact and affect change. Quite frankly, I think we all do have that power. I also want to reflect a little bit about the competitiveness amongst each other in this environment that we're in within the not-for-profit sector, and also that need to trust each other, because we're doing the same thing. We don't want to recreate the wheel, policy-oriented pieces and things like that. So I think when we're looking at, the exhaustion that we're facing and the heaviness of our work, there are ways in which within this complexity that we have that trust, and that we can continue to build that trust even as our sector, and even though we do have to at times compete for those resources in different ways. So I think that's some of the things that were also going on in my head when we were talking about these big issues that we're and opportunities, quite frankly, that we have in front of us, and our ability to sort of create our narrative going forward. And what does this look like for a better outcome for the people that we're serving, and amongst each other in this accountability as well. So thank you so much. Appreciate your time and expertise, and really looking forward to sitting down with you in the next week or so as well. And thank you all, everyone, for coming today, for participating and being that active listening, and taking this back. We're so grateful that you're here. And we're also, as you know, Perth-Huron is actively trying to create a network amongst our not-for-profits and formalize that a little bit more. And so really looking forward to being stronger together and working with you as we go forward. So we have this recorded, as you know, so we will be providing this information to everyone and share amongst your networks. We think this knowledge and expertise is so welcome and so needed to sort of fill our marble jars and move forward in our day. So thanks again, everyone. Take care and all the best.